I was thinking that unlike the way we are in our world and the way we behave ourselves and our culture and our values, and not defending what David did, but it occurs to me he had a lot of women that he slept with. They were married, but he had 6, 7 wives at least so far. I keep coming back to that one series of 3 pasukim, 3 verses, where it talks about how he took on this wife and she gave him a son, that wife and she gave him a son, etc., etc. So he had 6 wives, and that did not include Michal, and that was the 7th wife. And when you have 7 different women to choose from, the psychology, the psyche of sleeping with a woman who's technically not married, technically just been to the mikveh, the psyche is different. It's sort of like, I'm the king, and not only who's going to stop me and what's stopping me, but what's wrong with it? There are things that some people get into, nothing to do with this subject, that a third party looks and says, did you just do that or not do that? And the response is kind of like, yeah, what's wrong with it? And a third party comes and says, I don't know where you came up with that, but that's not right. It's not a right way to behave. It's not all kinds of stuff like that. Where'd you come up with that? What's wrong with it? I've always done that. Well, you're not supposed to, or it's not proper. I don't know, eating with your hands, aside from holding a hot dog in a bun. You eat with your hands? Yeah, what's wrong with it? People don't eat with their hands anymore. It's not King Henry in the Middle Ages, before they had forks and knives and spoons, or whenever they came up with forks and knives and spoons. You're supposed to eat with forks and knives and spoons. Now, I'm not comparing that issue with this issue, but for him, unlike for us, the idea of sleeping with another woman out there, in this case for like a one-night stand, or 2 or 3 nights till the husband comes home, is a certain aspect of what's wrong with it. Had she not gotten pregnant, everything else probably would not even have been written up in the Navi. It would not have become part of Jewish history and Jewish morality to talk about it and learn about it. Who knows whether he slept with other women? He had concubines, and the Navi does not talk about every concubine. And to the degree that we might feel, well, yeah, but that's not right. It's a different world with different rules. And for the king, there was nothing wrong with it. Not only by his thinking, but by the halakha. It might seem strange. Yeah, but come on, you can't do that. But you can do that if you're the king, and if she's single, not married, and if she's been to the mikveh. The question came up last week, was it a rape? And I answered, I don't know. We know that he had messengers bring her into the palace, and then it says he slept with her. There's actually a different word for rape. The word shochev, lishkov, vayishkav, is and he lay with her. That's the word that the Tanakh uses. There's a separate word, anas, ones, le'anos, and that would be the rape. Now, a rape can be inferred from the word vayishkav, but it doesn't say vaya'anos. So I don't even know that it was a rape. For all I know, from what we know, from the commentators, they don't comment on it as a rape. They comment that messengers were sent to her. The king would like to see you in the palace. So far, nothing to do with sex. And she's going to the palace. If somebody rang on my door and said, President Trump would like to speak to you, he's considering you for Defense Department secretary in case Hexeth doesn't come through. Obviously, in my case, I would say I'm not available right now. I've got a Navi class to teach, among other things. And obviously, he's not sending me for that. Greater chance to be ambassador to Israel. Even greater chance that he would send me to be ambassador to Saudi Arabia. But let's say I would like that. I'd go. And if there was a nefarious purpose by the time I got there, and he's calling me instead because he wants me to, he understands I'm an attorney, and he wants me to give him Michael Cohen quality advice, I'd be in a pickle. And I would have to figure out a nice way to say, I'm out of here. And I have to fall back on my universal excuse, just had a lung transplant. I recommend it for everyone. It gets you out of all kinds of stuff. She came to the palace. She didn't know it was sexual. Okay, now she's in the palace, and he has the guards leave, and he brings her to a bedroom or whatever. And what went on exactly, how that intimacy took place, we don't know. I'm going to assume it was not a rape. It was an interesting question. It could have been a rape. Why am I going to assume it's not? I don't know. But I do know later in the story, he marries her. And there's first of all, there's no indication at any point that she doesn't want to be married to him. Furthermore, the day on his deathbed, she's there with him at his deathbed. So she's been with him for years, 20 years, 30 years. He died at age 70. At this point, he's maybe 30 to 40 years. I don't know. So she's with him for 30 to 40 years. And of her own volition, she has a motivation also. She wants to be sure that her son, Solomon, is designated before David dies as the new king rather than one of his other sons, such as Adoniah, which is a whole thing. We'll learn about it later. But she was with him. Now, you could say she was raped and she got used to the relationship, and after the fact, she made her peace with it. You could say that if you want to, but I don't think it really seems consistent with the text and the narrative and the storyline. Did she embrace the situation? The text doesn't tell us, because the text is focused solely on an act that took place and a morality lesson to derive from it. And the morality lesson we're going to learn today and next week, particularly. And so we have that, but I wanted to clarify, if it's not already clarified, it's already become somewhat clarified that she had been divorced with a get, that she had been in a mikveh. But I wanted to clarify, because it was the very end of the class that I was asked, was this a rape? And I wanted a little more time to stress that she goes on to be married to him for years and years, and a perfectly fine relationship, and becomes a willing queen. Among other women, she becomes the main woman in the harem. She's the queen of queens. Okay, so we have that. What did the commentators say so far? I gave you an overview, but we didn't actually look in the text of the commentators. So let's do that now. As always, thank you for being here. Oh, I got to do my little spiel also. This is Rabbi Rav Fischer of Young Israel of Orange County. If you are watching this on YouTube, we welcome you, hope you like it, and welcome you to come to these classes live, because some things get edited out from the original version for time. If you like it, please give us a like. That helps our YouTube placement. And we urge you to subscribe to this channel. And if you really like it, send the link to someone else who might like to learn this. And if you have an enemy, there's no better way to get even with them than to send them a link from one of my classes. Okay. So we've been learning chapter 11, and we're not going to go verse by verse. We've learned it twice, and we'll come up with it as it comes up. Here we go. the assumption is that you've been with me for the verse by verse. This is the Radak on verse 3. David sent and asked about that woman, the woman he saw naked on the rooftop. And he said, they returned with the words, "This is Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." The Hittites were one of the 7 nations that had to be driven out from the land of Israel as a nation. Whether an individual here and there managed to survive is another story, but there were 7 nations. Mohammed Mitzvah, we learned about that on Thursdays, a commanded war. And the Hittites didn't say, what do I mean? He was Uriah the Hittite. She was married to a non-Jew? How could that be? Vayed Rosh Isha, Darash Lianshe Beita Ba'ad Ha'isha. Radak says he sent messengers to go to that building and to ask at the building, who exactly lives here? Mihi, who is she? Imhi Bathsheba, and they learn this is Bathsheba. Uriah Hachiti, Uriah the Hittite, what's that about? Efsher. Ki ger haya, maybe he was a convert. You're allowed to convert, and we're allowed to accept converts from the Canaanite tribes. Only from Amalek we may not. We have to wipe them out, and we may not from Moab and Ammon. But from the Hittite tribes, we're allowed. Moab and Ammon descend from Lot. That night that he was taken right after Sodom and Amorah were destroyed, he fled to a cave with his 2 daughters. They got him drunk, and 2 nights in a row, one night he got one pregnant, the next night the other pregnant. One was named Moab, one was named Ammon, and nations came from them. We're not allowed to marry into them for reasons we've learned in the past, primarily Thursday night, ethics and values of war. But otherwise, you're allowed to convert, and we receive them. And maybe he was a convert from the Hittites. Oh, Yisrael haya v'korol chiti, lefi shagar im b'nei chet. V'chen iti. So, for example, he may have lived among the Hittites. Like sometimes a person is known by the city or state that he's associated with. I think there's a hamburger chain called Jersey Mike's. Jersey Mike. In the mafia, they would have things like, Kansas City Lou or Chicago Al or whatever the case may be. And people would be known by the city they come from in some cases, or that he lived among them. Okay, so he was Jewish. Regardless, he was Jewish. Going forward with the Malbim, David called to Uriah and said, go to your house, wash your feet. Uriah left in the palace, and David sent with him a whole beautiful catered meal and waiters and caterers to set it up for Uriah to be indoors, have his feet washed, be nice and clean, have a lovely meal with his wife, and then go to bed with her. Malbim. So the Malbim talks, it's some length here, so I want to keep it a bit, just this part of it. Uriah left the palace, and following him from the palace were the caterers, bringing this magnificent banquet to his house. V'tirgam Yonatan Sudata de Malka. One of the commentators who translated the Bible, primarily this one translated Navi, primarily was Targum Yonatan. He translated the Bible into Aramaic. Before Jews like us began speaking English, Spanish, French, in biblical times, well, they spoke Hebrew and Egyptian, I guess. And then in Talmudic times, they spoke Aramaic, a blend of Hebrew with the local Middle Eastern dialect of the Babylonians. Nowadays, Kurds and Chaldeans, they're found in Iraq, and they speak probably a more pure Aramaic. The Jewish Aramaic of the Talmud is sort of a blend of their Aramaic, their Chaldean and Kurdish Aramaic, with some Hebrew. Just as Yiddish is a blend of German with some Hebrew. And then the Hebrew gets kind of like corrupted as it gets mixed in with the German. And so instead of Yom Tov in German, in Yiddish, we say Yontov. Instead of bracha, it's bracha. It becomes, instead of something like tomar or tagid bracha, say a bracha, it becomes mach bracha, using some German like mach schnell, make fast, mach with bracha. Yiddish is German with Hebrew, and the Hebrew gets messed up and Germanized, corrupted. During World War II, my first father-in-law, I've had 3 father-in-laws. My first father-in-law fought in World War II, and he was in Patton's unit, General Patton. And when they took German prisoners of war, they assigned that father-in-law to translate. Nobody in the unit knew German. And Patton asked, does anybody here know German? And my father-in-law, my former father-in-law, said, I don't speak German, but I speak Yiddish, and it has some German in it. And Patton said, let's see what you can get. And he tried to get the name, rank, and serial number. And my former father-in-law told the story. It's probably the only delightful exchange I ever had with him. It was a delightful exchange. He talked about, he'd say, was der Numen, the Nomen. That's how you say it in Yiddish. And apparently that's how you say it in German too. Like if you would say, what's your name? They could plead, I don't know, was der Nomen? And the guy will say something like, Fritz von Fritz. And then my father-in-law didn't know the word for rank. For serial number, I guess, was the Nummer? I don't know. He got a number. And the way he tells it, in Yiddish, how do you ask another person how they're doing? Like in English, how you doing? And it's not taken literally. Like, what am I doing? I'm talking now. How you doing? I'm doing fine. I'm doing miserably. How you doing? But it's not literal. In Hebrew, ma shlomcha, ma shlomech. What is your peace? P-E-A-C-E. How you doing? In Yiddish, was macht der Yid? What does a Jew make? Is the literal translation. Was macht der Yid? And then you'd say, I'm doing fine. My former father-in-law talked about how, okay, he's got the name, he's got the number, and then he's going to ask him who is the guy, and the only way to know to say it is, was macht. You're asking a German Nazi, was macht der Yid? And looking back, he realized that was ridiculous. But anyway, Yiddish is German, and so it's German with some Hebrew. Talmudic Aramaic is Chaldean Kurdish Aramaic with some Hebrew, and Targum Yonatan translated, that was the language Jews spoke in everyday life. And he translated the Bible into Jewish Aramaic. I learned a little bit about this because in law school, on Law Review, I was the chief articles editor of Law Review, and I had 3 articles editors working for me. One of them was a guy named Chris, who was Chaldean. He traced back to Chaldea. I didn't even know they were around anymore. And we talked a little, and I mentioned we speak like a little bit of Aramaic. He says, well, I speak Aramaic. And I said, could I try a sentence or two? And it turned out it's like a different Aramaic. That's how I found out. So anyway, back to this. Targum Yonatan, Tirgem Yonatan, Seudata de Malka. As I said, the Aramaic had within it Hebrew. Seudata de Malka is Seuda, a feast, Shel HaMelech, the king's feast. So what's the Masad HaMelech? They sent back, following Uriah, a bunch of caterers, bringing all the different food. It would be with a catering truck if they had vehicles in those days. And they brought it to Uriah's house. He's only a block away. Sham Masa'at Hunach Ala Mincha She'itena Nechbad El haniklal l'naso legadlo. This kind of meal was set up to bring a person great honor and glory. A nasi is a president. Linso is to uplift, elevate. Legadlo from gadol, to uplift, elevate, make him higher. V'chein kabdehu David kavod gadol. And thus David honored him with an enormous honor. Not only was he telling him to go back home and sleep with his wife, he was giving him great honor. Sheshalach lo leveto masat mishulchan hamelech, that he sent with him a magnificent feast from the king's table, kederech hasarim, like what might be given to an officer in the cabinet. V'lo hayalo lena'etz masat hamelech be'enei kol avdei hamelech. It was highly inappropriate for him to contemn, to treat with contempt this magnificent banquet, and to do it in the presence, in front of all the servants of the king. He blew it off. Shenishar petach beit hamelech v'lo halach leveito lekabel hakavod hagadol hazeh. How did he contemn it? How did he show his contempt for it? Because they arrived at his house, ready to walk inside and set it up on the table. He chose instead Vayishkaf Uriah petach beit hamelech, and Uriah decided he's just going to lie down right here at the initially at the front entrance to the palace. He stepped out of the palace and he sat down at the palace door right outside in front of the palace initially. Later, David finally got him, and he went and he sat down in front of his house, but he never went inside. At Kol Avdei Adonav, and he did this in the presence of all of the servants of his Lord, and he did not go home. Terrible chutzpah, terrible contempt for the king, effectively. Le'echol seudat hamelech beveito. He would not go into his house to eat le'echol, ochel, to eat seudat hamelech, the feast, the banquet of the king, beveito, b'bayit shelo, in his house, im ishto, together with his wife, ha'isha shelo, uchadai bizayon v'katzef, and his tremendous contempt for the king. So we now go to the Malbim on 11:9. So Uriah slept at the front door of the palace. And the text, as it says, that he lay on the ground in front of the palace, right outside, with all the servants of the king. It was even worse that he did this in the presence of all the servants, to show them v'heim hergishu baza. He made sure, and indeed they perceived exactly what he was doing, that he was showing contempt for the king. It was shocking. Remember from last class, and from what we've learned in the past in Rambam on the Thursdays, the king has the power of life and death to order someone's execution. This was shocking. So we come now to the Malbim on 11:10. Vayagid David lemor lo yirad Uriah beito. So the servants went to David and said it didn't work. Now the servants don't necessarily know what's going on, because she just became pregnant. So there's no indication that she's pregnant. For all I know, they don't even realize that David and she had been intimate. But they came and they said, you told us to tell the guy to go to his house, and we want you to know he didn't go. Vayomer David al Uriah. So David essentially said, bring him over. Let me talk to him directly. Halomi derech hatava. And David said, look, you came from a long way. You've been on a long journey. Madua lo yiradta el beitecha. Why haven't you gone into your house? Vayagid leDavid v'David lo ratza lo dialo shechara apo. Now David was furious upon hearing that I ordered him to go into his house. He didn't do it. In fact, he maximized the contempt by lying down in front of my palace in the presence of my servants. So David was filled with fury, but he was a professional. He was a king, and he kept his eyes on the prize. The prize was, I got to get this guy into his house. This is not a moment for me to yell at him. I got to, or to execute him. I got to get this guy into his house. His wife just got pregnant. No one knows but she and I. And once he's in that door and closes that door, then 6 months from now, when she starts showing a basketball in her stomach, and 9 months when she gives birth, everyone but she and I, and maybe Uriah, will assume he got her pregnant. He came home 9 months ago, and he went into his house. At worst, he's claiming he didn't get her pregnant. And everyone's going to look at him like, okay, what do I care? Who got her pregnant? The king? So everyone will assume he got her pregnant. She'll tell him, you got me pregnant. And maybe he'll even come to a point where he begins to think to himself, I guess I got her pregnant. I don't know. I don't think I slept with her, but maybe I was drunk, right? Like you have this, I mean, I don't want to get into the politics of it, and I don't know what went on with Hegseth at that Republican conference where he's admitted that he had intercourse with a woman, and the debate is, did he pull her and rape her? Did she get him drunk and lead him to a room? And I don't know. Frankly, at this moment, I don't want to know. It's not in my hands. It's in the hands of the committee, and I don't know what. But you can imagine that if Uriah got drunk and the wife is saying, who else? Of course it was you. Do you think I was with any? No, I don't think you were with anyone else. You wouldn't. That's not you. You're not like that. So David's got one goal. I gotta get him into his house. And I'm not going to yell at him, and I'm not going to hurt his feelings and get him angry, because then he's clearly chutzpahdik. He's clearly filled with chutzpah, with brazenness and arrogance. He's clearly in my face already. The last thing I want to do with this guy right now is to get him more into my face. Let's see if I can somehow gently induce him, get him to go inside. Again, I'm going to kill him, the king is thinking. But this is complicated. And as we said last week, and we're going to see here, it's complicated. I totally can kill him. I have the authority, and he's in rebellion. And we're going to see, as we did last week, and we're going to see again, he was in more rebellion than we realized. But if I kill him, then she becomes a widow, marriageable, and I don't want anybody else marrying her. I want her. And I can take her, and she'll agree. But how's it going to look? I execute a guy on Monday, and on Thursday, I'm marrying the widow. It doesn't look good. And how am I going to convey to people? I executed him not to get the wife. I executed him. I just was going to do a one-night stand. No, I can't tell them that either. I executed him because he was in rebellion. Now, stick with me, ladies and gentlemen. He's saying to the country, separate subject. Now she's a widow. Has nothing to do with his execute. He's executed because he's Benedict Arnold. She's available. One thing has nothing to do with the other thing. Why shouldn't I marry her? I'm allowed to. Why should someone else marry her? But he knows it's going to look so horrible, it's just not going to work. It's going to ruin his image. And look at us in the year 2024, 5785. It's ruined his image for all time, what unfolded. Even though we're finding that technically, he did not break any law. And yet look what it's done to his image for all time. So he's trying to avoid that. So Malbim is pointing out that he's trying to avoid getting him angry. He's trying to talk to him very gently and doesn't want to tell him how angry he is. So David lo ratza, David did not want lahodia lo, to inform him, to make known to him from the word yodea, shechara apo, that he's raging furiously, al she'avar al pekudato, on grounds that this subject of his manifestly is transgressing his command. Ki chashash ulai noda'alo hama'aseh. David was slightly, not intensely, but a little bit wondering whether somehow the word had gotten back to Uriah that David had slept with Bathsheba. How would he know? I don't know how he would know. David doesn't know how he would know. But people find out things. Even though you don't nowadays have, in those days, secret recordings and the whole room is bugged and the phones are bugged and people find out things. David was concerned, ulai, maybe, perhaps, no da'ah, from the word yodea, maybe it was known to Uriah, lo, to him, hama'aseh, that which was done. V'ratzah lachkor zeh, b'meisiach lefi tumo. And David was kind of like indirectly, subtly trying to get a handle on whether Uriah knew or suspected. So David was like just talking to him, meisiach lefi tumo, just talking, not on that subject, just talking, hey, why didn't you go home? Why didn't you go to your house? Without being more direct. Are you angry at me? Which would give Uriah a chance maybe to say yes. Why didn't you go to your house? So he's saying like, yeah, why didn't you go to your house? It just came from a long distance. There's actually a requirement for a man to return to his wife. It's actually the Talmud, that a man is supposed to go to his wife when he comes back from a long journey. More frequently than being at war, it would be like a merchant seaman. And you go on a ship, a merchant ship, and you're going to China, or you're going wherever you're going. And how many days and weeks is the journey? And then you're there doing business, and then you're coming back and you're gone for a month or 3 months, because they didn't do it by airplane in those days. According to Talmud, if you're like a merchant seaman and you're away on a long journey, and not only a merchant seaman, you're a captain of a ship. You come back, you have to go straight home, and you have to be private with your wife the first day. And what if she needs to go to the mikveh? So you're with your wife, and you're not physically intimate, but you're supposed to be there with your wife. You should show your wife she's priority one. Now, that doesn't mean you have to give the wife 12 hours a day of attention. But she needs to know you just came back from a journey. The first place you went is not to O'Gallagher's bar or to the local bowling alley, or to Dodger Stadium to see the Yankees. But the first step you made is to see your wife. Is that he's afraid she'll find out. And he's saying, you've just come back from a long distance, and the halakha is you have to go back to your wife. A man is obligated to visit his wife, to reconnect with his wife at the time he comes back from his journey. So this brings us to the next point I'm going to bring you. We did not do this last week because I did not have enough time to give you the background. So I'm going to race through a little piece from the book of Judges. This is a story. I mean, it's a true story. And it's not based on a true story. When you see my son, when he was 13, we were watching TV one night, my wife and Ellen and Aaron and I, and we were watching TV, and it begins, the movie based on a true story. And he said to me, Abba, when a movie begins with the words based on a true story, that means it's not true, right? And I thought about it. That's one of the many ways I knew that he was like a genius kid. This is a true story. There was an evil in the time of Judges, Shoftim. There was an evil person who, for a brief amount of time, ruled over a group in the Jewish people, and it was brief. His name was Avimelech. There are various Avimelechs that show up in the Bible. There was an Avimelech, a king in the time of Abraham, who took Sarah, and that whole story. There was an Avimelech to whom David fled when he was fleeing from Saul, who was trying to kill him. And David left the country and acted like he was insane, so that when he was taken by people who saw him and thought he should get executed for having killed Goliath, they brought him before Avimelech, and Avimelech took a look at him and said, "This guy is so messed up, leave him alone, we don't have to kill him." B'shanoto et hamol lifnei Avimelech. There's a famous psalm about that. We recite it Shabbat morning davening. Here was a Jew, Avimelech. Avimelech and all the troops he had with him went up on Mount Salmon. Taking an axe in his hand, Avimelech lopped off a tree limb and lifted it on his shoulder, and he said to the troops that accompanied him, "What you saw me do, quick, do the same." So each of the troops also lopped off a bow, and then they marched behind Avimelech and laid them against the tunnel and set fire to the tunnel over their heads. Why doesn't Israel do that in Gaza? Just set fire at both ends of the tunnel to tree limbs. Why don't they do that? That's not bad. They're afraid there's hostages inside. Thus all the people of the Tower of Shechem also perished, about 1,000 men and women. This guy was a mass killer. He was heartless, he was cruel. Most of us don't know about this. Everybody knows, everybody who comes to shul every week and follows the weekly Torah reading knows about the Avimelech with Abraham and Sarah, Avram and Sarah. Everybody knows about those who learn and daven on Shabbos morning know about the Avimelech that David acted insane in front of. But almost nobody knows about the Avimelech from this story, Judges chapter 9. He massacred in order to be in power. Avimelech proceeded to Tevetz. He encamped at Tevetz and occupied it, captured it. Vayil Kedah, better translation, captured it. Within the town was a fortified tower, and the men of Tevetz and women took refuge there, including all the citizens of the town. They shut themselves in, locked the gates of the city. Think of the walls of Jericho when Yehoshua came into Eretz Israel. In those days, you didn't just march into a city. The city had a tower, such that everyone could hide in the tower. Look, the invading army could wipe out the tower, set fire to the tower, smash the tower, like what happened at Masada eventually, what happened in Jerusalem at the hands of the Romans. But it slowed them down. Look what we just saw the last week in Syria. They did not have towers. There's nothing to slow them down. The only way that Bashar al-Assad was able to hold power and defend from all these other cutthroat Arab Muslims was because he had the backing of Hezbollah, Iran, and Putin. And because of Israel fighting for its own security and safety, they've mostly wiped out Hezbollah. So Hezbollah couldn't spare any troops anymore to go and protect Assad. Israel knocked out Iran's air defenses, Iran's positions in Syria, and 80% of Iran's ballistic missiles and her ability to manufacture more. So Iran suddenly could not send in weapons and men and money to Assad. And Putin is tied up with Ukraine. And so Assad had nothing, nor did he have towers. And they just cut through it like a knife through butter. Well, here, the people of Tevetz, not the month in the calendar, which is with a Tav, and it's Samach, that's Teves. So the people of Tevetz went into the tower, took refuge, all the citizens. They shut themselves in and went up on the roof of the tower. Avimelech pressed forward to the tower and attacked it. I've left out a lot of text preceding this, other than the one prior massacre, where he massacred 1,000 Jews. I could give you a lot more of his massacres, but we have time factors. But he's on the march, like those Arab Muslim murderers in Syria who are on the march to take down Assad. So he pressed forward, and he's now going to destroy these people. He approached the door of the tower to set it on fire. Presumably it was built out of wood rather than brick or stone. But a woman on the top of the tower, looking down at him as he was there setting fire, dropped a huge kind of a heavy weight. The kind of weight, how can I describe it? You see those, if you've ever seen like a movie with the like inside of like church bells in a clock tower, where the clocks, those clocks on towers, the heavy weights on both sides, the tick tock, like one of those incredibly heavy thingies. A woman dropped an upper millstone on Avimelech's head from all the way up on the tower. He's standing right underneath her on the ground, setting fire to the door, and she just lets it fall and cracked his skull. But the shlach isha achat pelach rachev al rosh Avimelech. A woman sent out a pelach, a pelach could be a slice or an item of great weight, like a big chunk of marble. Al rosh Avimelech, on the head of Avimelech. V'atoretz et gulgalto, and she smashed his skull. Vayikra mehira el hanar, and he rapidly called to his assistant, his attendant, Nosei Chelav, his number one guy who was with him, who is like his caddy, who carried all of his weapons for him. Vayomer lo shlof charbacha umoteteni, and he said, quick, pull out the sword and slaughter me, kill me. Do you remember the tragic story of King Saul? Shaul HaMelech, as he was dying at the hands of the Philistines, and knew what they would do to him if they caught him while he was still alive. They already had killed Jonathan and his other son, and he needed to be dead, he felt. And he turned to his attendant, and he begged his attendant, he's mortally wounded anyway, and he said, kill me before the Philistines get me. God knows what they'll do to me. And the attendant would not do it. He would not assume on himself to kill the anointed of God, if you remember that story. Later on, an Amalekite was running by. He did not particularly have a horse in the race, as between the Philistines and the Jews. And the king called out to him, can you please kill me? And he's an Amalekite, sure, with love. So here, Avimelech is begging his attendant, kill me. Why? So even though his head is cracked, his skull is cracked mortally, he's going to die from this, but he's able to articulate a few more words. Why is he in such a rush to be killed? He'll die in 5 minutes anyway. Pen yomruli, isha haragadhu. You must kill me, that it should not be written in Jewish history that a woman killed me. Finish me off, that they may not say of me, a woman killed him. Vayitkarehu na'aro vayamot. The attendant stabbed him and he died. How do you like that one? How do you like those marbles? I once saw a parody movie. I'm going blank on what movie it was. It was like a parody of American Westerns. And there's this one scene where a guy gets shot and he's about to die. He has like 3 minutes of life left. He gets shot to death, whatever it was. in a shootout, like a middle of town. And he was either barefoot or was wearing socks, if they had them on. And he looks at his friend and he says, quick, quick, there are my boots, put them on, get them on me. And he's thinking, like the friend is thinking, why? Unfortunately, you're dead. You're dead in 3 minutes. Why? And he says, because I want them to know that I died with my boots on. And this is like the same thing. I don't want them to say that a woman killed me. Here's why am I teaching you this fascinating story? Let's take a look. Let's take that off the screen and let's get that off the screen. Okay. So why am I teaching you that? Get it off the screen. Because the text says, I skipped it last week because I knew I'd need the time to tell you the Avimelech story. That, let's see. Okay. Let's just get back. Okay. So you'll remember that what next transpires is that David tells him to go into his house. He won't go in his house. He ends up sleeping outdoors from his house, Uriah. Finally, you remember from last week that David sent to Yoav, the chief of staff, I'm sending back this guy Uriah. I want you to put him in a place of peril so that he pretty much almost surely gets killed. We learned last week, Yoav gets the message. He's just following orders. David's the commander-in-chief. Yoav is the chief of staff. And he's following orders. And he's got a siege on the city. And they're getting shot at daily by arrows from the top of the tower. As they're laying siege, they're waiting for the city to finally give up because they're starving, no more water, no more food. But that's going to take a year or two because they have supplies to withstand the siege for a while. So for a year or so, they're getting shot at by arrows. And Yoav anyway determines we just need to risk some lives and attack the fortress, the tower. We're going to lose some lives making that attack, but in the long run, we will lose fewer people attacking the tower than we are going to lose if we keep standing here like pigeons, ducks in a shooting gallery for the next 2 years. Okay. And what happens is Uriah is one of the people who gets sent to the tower and he gets killed at the tower. So you remember from last week that, let's just go quickly and you'll see why I just taught this now. All right. Uriah answered, the ark and Israel and Yehudah are located at the city of Sukkot, and my master Yoav and your majesty's men are camped in the open. How can I go home and eat and drink and sleep with my wife? As you live by your very life, I won't do it. We learned about that last week. David said to Uriah, all right, stay here today also, and tomorrow I'll send you off. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day, and the next day David summoned him. He ate and drank with him until he got him drunk, hoping one final time I somehow can get him into his front door. Maybe drunk enough that he won't resist and he'll just do it, barely knowing what he's doing. But in the evening, Uriah went out to sleep in the same place with his lord's officers. He did not go down to his home. So that was it. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Yoav, which he sent to Uriah, with Uriah. He wrote in the letter, place Uriah on the front line where the fighting is fiercest, then fall back so that he may be killed. So when Yoav was besieging the city, he stationed Uriah at the point where he knew that there were able warriors. And he knew it was a most dangerous place. The men of the city sallied out and attacked Yoav. That is, the people of the other side came out from the tower to attack. Some of David's officers among the troops fell. Uriah was among those who died. Yoav sent the full report of the battle to David, instructing him that when you finish reporting to the king all about the battle, king may get angry and say to you, why did saying of me, Yoav, because he's sending to the messenger. Will the king get angry at Yoav and say to the messenger to go back to Yoav and say, why did you come so close to the city to attack it? Didn't you know they would shoot from the wall? Who struck down Avimelech? This is why I just taught you that chapter. That David will quote back or cite back to Yoav the historical memory. All the Jews of Israel at this time in Shmuel Bet, 2 Samuel, knew the history from the book of Judges. Even we're learning it, all the more so they lived it or knew, had great-grandparents who could tell you about it. So David's saying, come on, who struck down Avimelech? Was it not a woman who dropped an upper millstone on him from the wall at Tevetz, from which he died? So why did you come so close to the wall? Didn't you learn anything from the basic textbooks? So Yoav is saying to the messenger, when you tell David that we went up to the wall and some of our officers died and Uriah died, say if he gets angry, why did we go to the wall? Add your servant Uriah the Hittite was among those killed. And without explaining to the messenger why, Yoav knew that would be all David needs to know in order to be satisfied with the way it worked out. Vayelech hamalach, and so the messenger went, Vayavo vayagid leDavid kol asher shlacho Yoav, and he went and he told David everything that Yoav had told him to say. The messenger said to David, first the men prevailed against us, the bad guys, the people of Sukkot, and they sallied out against us into the open. They came out into the open field. Then we drove them back up to the entrance to their gate, at Petach Hashar. But the archers, the people of that city who were on the roof of had their arrows, and shot their poisonous and fiery arrows at us. Vayoru Hamorim, Alavadach Me'al Choma, those marksmen of your servant on top of the wall, Vayamutu Me'avder Melech, members of the king's servants died. Vagam Avdachor Uriah Achiti made, and also your servant Uriah died. Some of your majesty's men fell. Your servant Uriah the Hittite also fell. And David understood everything. Whereupon David said to the messenger, give Yoav this response. Don't be distressed about the matter. The sword always takes its toll. Never know who's going to die in battle. It happens in every battle. Someone's going to get hit. Don't let it worry you. That's what happens when you're the chief of staff of an army at war. Don't lose sleep over it. Press your attack on the city and destroy it. That's the message to Yoav. V'chazkehu, and inspire him. Encourage him. Tell him David really is thoroughly satisfied with the way you did it. And go and finish. Okay. When Uriah's wife heard that her husband Uriah was dead, she lamented over her husband. Okay. So we now go to the commentary on that about Avimelech, 951, 57, and then we go to Malbim on 1125. Okay. So you go to Malbim on 1125. So David said, tell Yoav, it's okay. In other words, he was sending a message back to Yoav that the strategic decision to go at the wall, that's okay, no problem. Kitov yoter sheitkarvu el hachoma v'sham yilchamu ad yaharsu et hachoma, because it's actually strategically better that you should approach the wall and attack the wall, at the wall, until you destroy the wall. That's actually, from a purely strategic point of view, a better strategy, than staying a long distance away, maintaining an endless siege, because one way or another, people are going to die from the sword. What Solomar, in other words, If you're going to have an extended siege, and your men are going to just stand in the open, a distance from the city, if the people are going to keep shooting at you and shooting at you and shooting at you, their arrows and whatever they got, their catapults, you're going to lose twice as many men as if you attack the wall. More than if you have some die from arrows and stones drop down from the wall. What's going to happen is that if you go to the wall, even though you're going to lose people, you're going to take out a lot of them. And once you take the wall, that's it. No more attacks. No one else is going to be falling down. You bring it to an end. Therefore, go for it. Go to the wall, wipe them out. Told the servant to encourage Yoav to finish the job. So we have two last commentaries for today. That on 11:26, but the Shema Eshet Uriah, he met Uriah, Isha, when Bathsheba heard that her husband Uriah had died at war, but the Spodal Bala, she sat Sheva. It doesn't say she sat Sheva. It says Vatispod, Hesped. She mourned. She mourned, whether it was sitting 7 days, however it is that she mourned losing her husband. When the word got to David, it immediately was publicized throughout the country that Uriah had died. It's like very tragically, if you look at the Israeli newspapers, it's different from America. In America, we send people into Afghanistan, into Iraq, except for the fall, except for that disastrous retreat from Afghanistan on that one day at the airport. When Americans fall, you don't hear about, you hear that people fell, they're like numbers. To the average American, we don't know who they are, what they are. Once in a while, a local community pays homage to a local citizen who died. But by and large, whether they fell in Vietnam, whether they fell in Iraq, Korea, it's so different from Israel. In Israel, it's just remarked at. So here it was publicized among the Jews, one guy dies, it's a national news story. It's more important than Hegseth and Daniel Penny and the guy that murdered the CEO of the healthcare. It's a national story that one person who is not famous becomes the number one story of the day. That's how we Jews and the people of Israel, it's difference in our culture. So it was publicized in the country, Uriah died. Uvat Asta Haspeda, and so Bathsheba went into mourning, karoi, as is appropriate. Uba Avur Yemei Ha'evel, and as soon as the days of mourning passed, Lacha David Leisha Bichtuva V'Kiddushin. David formally, so figure it was a week later, unless it was 30 days later, Shloshim, but like a week, either 7 days or 30 days, David took her with a ketubah, a formal marriage, and kedushin, with a chuppah and a ketubah. And the text concludes the chapter by David, after the mourning, sent and gathered her into his palace, Fatilol Isha, she became his wife. Isha means ketubah, means chuppah. Vatelad lo ben, and she got pregnant, gave birth to a child. That's the child with whom she was pregnant from the day of the unfortunate incident, tragic incident. And that which David had done was evil in the eyes of God. You see, what David had done, the entire step-by-step trajectory was hidden from public knowledge. No one knew. They didn't know he slept with her. They didn't know that she had become pregnant. They didn't know he sent him to go. Only the insiders knew that he wasn't going into his house. They didn't know why he was killed, etc., etc. V'ish al yeda b'chol ela ki im ha'elokim. No one knew the big picture in every step except for God. Shehu bochen levavot uchlayot. Because God knows what's in everyone's heart, in everyone's intestines and kidneys. Ve'einav mishotetot b'chol aretz. God sees everything in the world. V'chol davar lo nichachad mimenu. There is no deed, action that is hidden from God. Shera'a masha asa David, and he saw what David did. V'zehu amru be'enei Hashem, and that's what's meant when it says that it was evil before the eyes of God. Ratzal Omar, in other words, be'enei Yisrael lo haya hadavar u'meguneh. Among the Jews, no one perceived something wrong had happened. Ki lo hayu yodeim amitar davar. Because the Jews did not know the full truth story of be'enei Hashem shehaya hagol galui lefanav. But in the eyes of God, before him, everything is revealed. Haya hadavara, this was evil. Last commentary on the day, next chapter 12, first verse. Vayishlach Hashem et Natan el David. We learned last week the first verse. David sent the prophet Natan. He was the active leading prophet of the time, to go to him and say to him, there were two men. Shnei anashim hayu ba'ir echad, echad ashir v'echad rash. I want to tell you a story, an anecdote. There were two men in a city. One was wealthy, one was poor. Malbim. Vayishlach Hashem et Natan l'hochicho. God sent Nathan, to let David know that he acted horribly. Ki David haya b'zeh tzedek be'enei atzmo. Because David thought everything he had done was righteous. Achar she'ala b'yado hakol b'derech heter. Because everything he did, technically under the law, was permitted. Ve'ein onesh alav b'dinei basar v'dam. Under the laws that applied to human men and people, the code of Jewish law, the Chumash, the Talmud, the Rambam. Of course, Rambam's later, but he's codifying what was at that time. Under every law in the books, it was all legal. V'hispir lo cheta'o b'mashal. So the Navi, the prophet Natan, tried to convey God's thoughts and the bases for why God was reacting this way by first telling him a sort of anecdote, a story for an example. Ba'ofan shehu atzmo charatz mishpato. He wanted to tell him a story that would grab David in his own heart about someone else that would make David's heart boil, David's blood boil. Shnei anashim hayu be'ir echad, shebazeh yigdal ha'oshek yoter, b'yoto imo be'ir, makir be'inyan. The story is about two people in the same city, not strangers. In other words, we're setting up a story that's like what just happened, of two people who actually know each other. V'lo dai shelo azro, lakachat ashelo. And what he did, not only did he fail to help this fellow, but he did something terrible. And we'll be learning chapter 12 next week, God willing. I want to thank you all for being here for these classes on this story. And we have one last piece with which we'll begin before we get into chapter 12 next week. And that's the Gemara that discusses why was that mikveh on the roof, that tub on the roof, in which Bathsheba immersed herself, why was it such that it could be seen by David from across the way? Why wasn't it blocked? I've told you a few times it was blocked. It was hidden. And I told you we're going to learn it in the Gemara. But in my teaching of this unit, it has been my sense that the best way to get to that Gemara was first to give you the entire story, the entire picture. And now we're going to go back to that piece of Gemara, and we're going to go back to chapter 12. Thank you so very much for being here. Are there any questions? And then we'll break. Have a wonderful week. Hopefully we'll see you on Thursday and then next Sunday, God willing. Bye-bye.